Well, in this final section on settler colonialism in Algeria, I'm going to talk about something that I find fascinating, and not only fascinating, but also having contemporary echoes. We hear this kind of thing that I'll be talking about even to this day. What I'm going to talk about is colonialism, French colonialism's attitude toward the veil that Islamic women wear in some parts of the Islamic world, wore in some parts of the Islamic world. And I believe I've given you a reading that corresponds with this. Fanon's reading on colonialism. I think the title of the reading is Colonialism and the Veil. According to Fanon, beginning in the early 1930s, French officials intent on destroying the possibilities of Algerian nationalism made a strategic decision. The decision that they made was that they would undercut Algerian nationalism by breaking Algerian women, off from the Algerian people as a whole. And they would do that by campaigning for freedom of Algerian women to take the veil off. This decision, according to Fanon, was not a chance decision, but was made on the basis of careful French ethnographic, anthropological studies. The French hoped that they could win the allegiance of Algerian women by campaigning for what the French termed the rights of these women. So, on the one hand, Fanon says that there's clear evidence that there is a strategic character to the campaign that will be launched against the veil. And that strategic character is we're going to split the women off from Algerian society as a whole and thereby undermine. So the purpose is to undermine Algerian nationalism. But on the other hand, we're going to trumpet what we're doing in the highest moral terms. We're going to liberate the Algerian woman from the unconscionable and medieval and barbaric control that the Algerian man has over the Algerian woman. And so in Algeria itself, among the colons, and in France, amongst the French population as a whole, you had mutual aid societies springing up, proclaiming their desire to liberate the Algerian woman. Even as these same colons in Algeria sought at every turn to prevent the rights of the Algerians to political and civil rights, they're going to campaign for the rights of Algerian women to be free of the veil. The French and the colon bosses in Algeria itself targeted their Algerian male employees, attempting to break the bond between man and woman in Algerian society. And they targeted them with a regular campaign of harassment. They criticized the men for keeping their women in veil. and urging them to take their wives to the movies or to the cafes, and particularly and most difficult for the Algerian employee, to company parties. Algerian men who refused to comply with the employer's advice risked loss of their jobs, or, and possibly worse, if they conceded to their employers, their resistance to French colonial rule was broken. Finally, however, because neither man nor woman in Algerian society seemed to be in much of a hurry to liberate the woman, and I use that term not because I believe that's what's happening. I use it, in a certain respect, sarcastically. These people are not concerned about liberating the women of Algeria. They are not concerned about liberating the women of Algeria. They're concerned about breaking traditional Algerian culture, because if they can break that culture, they can more easily control the society as a whole. The reason that that the Algerians aren't in a hurry to take the veil off women is because the Algerians, both men and women, know that this is not being done for the benefit of the Algerian woman. It's being done for the benefit of French colonial rule. When the Algerian women did not seem to be in a rush to take off the veil, the French colonialists, the colons, the pieds noirs, took it to the next level, which is typical, I should ask. And the next level is always force or violence. So on May 13th, 1958, the colons rioted against the French. I can see I'm going to have to explain that last sentence. France, at a certain point, beginning in 1955, and I'm going to talk more about this, but beginning in 1955, the Algerians commenced a revolution against French colonial rule. And for the first 2 or 3 years of that revolution, the French stood behind the colon population within Algeria. But at a certain point, the war became too costly for France to maintain it, and the French split off from the colons, stopped backing the colons 100%, and started trying to figure out a way out of the situation. So in the face of the French retreat from full support for the pieds noirs rioted against the French, and in the course of that riot, the colons dragged Algerian house servants, they dragged Algerian poor women, they dragged Algerian prostitutes out into the streets and stripped off their veils, crying, "Vive l'Algeria française! Long live French Algeria." In other words, a continuation of French colonial rule. So when all else fails, if you can't get the Algerian woman, if you can't liberate the Algerian woman in her own mind, at least you can take, and that's what they do. They strip the veils off of these Algerian women. I should say one other thing, that the Algerian culture, the Arabic culture, the Islamic culture that we're talking about, considers it a great it considers it a threat to the sanctity of marriage, or the moral purity of the woman, to have a woman exposed to men other than her husband. And you can say whatever you want to say or think whatever you want to think about this situation, this belief. But what I can assure you of is this, is that anybody who's concerned about the genuine liberation of a people from a belief that may or may not be an accurate belief, anyone who gives serious thought to wanting to liberate people from illusion is going to have a very hard time unless he or she allows for people's discovering on their own the truth or the falsehood of their own beliefs. I hope that was clear. Ladies and gentlemen, I will see you in our next lecture.